Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the JOJOLands Chapter 16 review, which is a dense chapter this month that packs in a whole bunch of new characters that actually have a substantial role to play in the story and just continues to open up this world of Part 9, as we see more developments in the plot and those on the island working with and against the interest of the main cast. So let's get right into the breakdown. Kicking things off with the cover page, we have a solo Jodio illustration dancing in the rain. That kind of reminds me of JoJoLands Chapter 4's cover art, and then of course we have the title, That Girl's Bags Groove, Part 1, which is the name of the enemy stand we are currently fighting, Bags Groove, which is in reference to the Miles Davis song of the same name. And turning the page, we are welcomed into the chapter by a double-page spread of the Gains speeding through a Hawaiian metro as they attempt to escape the automatic stand's range, and we get some clarification as to how this attack actually started, which as the Gains suspected was the stand lying in wait inside of HOWLER's documents, and we see a closer look at the stand actually coming out from under the pages in that moment, targeting anyone who looked at the documents, which was my initial theory, and explains the order of attacks, with the office lady suffering from the symptoms the fastest, then it went into Osagi, and lastly Dragona, who had just begun to show symptoms right at the end of the last chapter. So that would make this an automatic pursuit colony type stand, I guess, and now that we've seen it attack multiple times, this allows Jodio to exercise his analytical side, as he realizes that if everyone is suffering from the same symptoms, the stand must have an automatic procedure. So this gives him a rough idea of where it should be right now in Dragona, and we get this really cool moment of the sibling Joestars working together to defeat an enemy, like a straight up Eyes of Heaven dual heat attack moment, as Jodio instructs Dragona to use smooth operators to grab a hold of the stand, and while it's pinned down, Jodio uses a droplet from November Rain, kind of like a bullet or the Emperor, as it weaves through Dragona's windpipe, locking onto the enemy stand, and through its power of weight is able to just blast right through it, destroying it. So of course Usagi is like, please man, me next, I'm dying over here, although since we haven't seen what happens next in the stand's procedure, Jodio wouldn't be able to accurately predict its movements. So the game decides to go to a hospital and use an MRI machine to get a better idea of where the stand actually is. And I assume the further they get away from the land office, the weaker the stand becomes, otherwise they probably wouldn't have enough time to actually get an MRI. And throughout the rest of the chapter, Usagi is still injured, but the damage doesn't seem to progress that much, as well as Charmy's eye slowly goes back to normal, so I would guess that there is a range limit to the stand, it's just really far. We then see the Gain arrive at the hospital, and I won't lie, I definitely got some JoJolian PTSD flashbacks here. If I never saw a hospital again in JoJo, it would still be too soon, so I just hope we aren't hanging around here for too long. The chapter then switches perspective back to the land office, where we are introduced to a new character, Agent Bobby Jean, who is investigating the camera footage of the Gain's heist. So it looks like Bobby Jean is a representative of HOWLER or a contracted employee working undercover to help protect their land. As the security guards give off the impression he's someone they know, some sort of government agent or police detective, but as the reader we can obviously tell he's here on HOWLER's behalf, and as we've seen in the past, the police and other people in power are pretty much owned by HOWLER, going back to Charming Man's flashback where we saw them aggressively protecting the land where Mauka had disappeared and where the water flowed from the lava tubes. So the guards ask him about his investigation and if it's at all about HOWLER's alleged improprieties regarding their land, going on to say it's a hot topic these days and that the chairman of that company has got to be guilty. So we're getting these crumbs of what the controversy surrounding HOWLER actually is. As the guard mentions, they say to be acting in the name of nature conservation, but that doesn't seem to be the truth. Although so far, the story hasn't really told us what is so bad about HOWLER or why the public opinion is so negative. It could come down to the fact that it's a privately owned company buying mass amounts of land, specifically, areas of nature, but the characters suggest they're using the land for something corrupt, specifically something to do with water, as mentioned in the last chapter with the congressman pursuing legal action, who actually shows up later on in this chapter. So for now, Bobby Jean, he just says he's a private citizen and is off duty. He was just in the neighborhood, just thought he'd stop by, trying to keep the whole situation as low-key as possible, as to not draw any suspicion to HOWLER's land documents. But with Bobby Jean is this little girl, not related or anything. He says he's just looking after her for the day, and she's kind of bratty. If she sees something she likes, she's got to have it. Reminds me a bit of the Higashikata family from part 8, very expressive and outspoken. So we get this whole scene of her freaking out over this rare Hulanyan dancer toy that they have at the office, although the tone shifts dramatically when this girl randomly gets a nosebleed, switching her personality into this, more nihilist and just completely serious mode, where we see that, like Bobby Jean, this girl is also an agent for HOWLER, paying close attention to the camera footage and points out that there's no footage of the group group actually leaving the office. So, this whole time they were really just focused on the camera footage. But they do see the real footage of the group carrying Usagi back to the van outside, as once the gang was attacked, his stand must have stopped working and was recalled. But the one security guard says that the guy throwing up definitely came into the building and he remembers seeing him spilling his ramen. So it turns out that detail was important, and this leads to the agents to making the conclusion that one of the groups they're looking at has to be fake. And now that Usagi's ability has been exposed, they know for a fact they aren't dealing with just ordinary students, but that these are stand users. It's then revealed that this little girl is actually Bags Groove's user, and her sudden nosebleed was caused by Jodio destroying one of the stands earlier. So we get this sense of time as the two scenes are happening simultaneously, and that the enemies are hot on their trail. So I think we can assume that Bobby Jean is also a stand user if he's working with Howler and this girl. It could be something like she has the long range automatic stand while Bobby has the close range stand for protection, and this is actually going to be a tag team fight. So the chapter then switches scenes back to the game, now inside the hospital, accidentally arriving on the ICU floor instead of the MRI floor, because Jodio is really bad when it comes to three-letter acronyms. Finally, dyslexic representation in JoJo. And when they're on the wrong floor, the gang notices the woman from the land registry, and Charmy says it's just awful that she got attacked because she wasn't connected to any of this at all. She just kind of got caught up in the chaos. And Paco adds on to this saying it's just so absurd, and this word catches Jodio's attention, lingering on the absurd, a concept that was introduced in the chapter 13 flashback and is within that same category as calamity energy explored in parts 7 and 8, irrational and unpredictable bouts of tragedy that people are destined to encounter that come about through a chain reaction of events, and can sometimes be manipulated through certain powers like Ticket to Ride and Wonder of You. It's an established force within the world. We then see the congressman who was mentioned at the end of the last chapter. I didn't expect him to turn up so soon, but here he is. And this is the politician that was going after Howler and is the father of the office worker, whose name just so happens to be Mr. White.
Mr. White, Mr. White, Mr. White, Mr. White.
So the situation with Mr. White here has a lot more going on with it than we can fully understand yet, as in his hands is an electronic document that has the power to seize Howler's land on the main island by using state authority, making it now state-owned land. However, with Mr. White is some sort of an assistant who is completely against this idea, saying they have far too little evidence to take such actions and that it would be a liability to do so, and that the seizure would go beyond the scope of their authority. So it looks like Mr. White has been planning to do this for a while, but now that his daughter was attacked, it's made him very emotional and knows that Howler has something to do with it. They've done other things like send him threats, so he just wants this to stop and take action. Although his assistant seems to think that this could have terrible consequences. And during their argument, Mr. White's daughter, Sophie, suddenly flatlines and they both rush over to the hospital bed, leaving the tablet behind. And the gang, who just so happened to be standing there and overheard this entire conversation, now see that the power to take Howler's land is up for grabs right in front of them, recognizing that this whole situation was influenced by the lava rock. Its power was guiding them here to be able to do this. And Dragona takes this opportunity to drag Mr. White's fingerprint onto the authorization button and sends off the documents, officially making the HOWLER volcano now state-owned land, which I assume is just one step in the process towards eventually taking it for themselves. I mean, it's already out of Howler's hands now, and things are just moving really quick here. I did not expect this to happen in this chapter. I mean, we've already taken land from Howler, essentially. So there's a few important things to take note of in this final scene. The first is that when Sophie White suddenly flatlines, I think that's signaling to us that the enemy stand users are approaching, if not already in the hospital, as remember, she was the first in the chain of actions of Bags Grove's attack. And secondly, this whole scene has massive implications regarding the power of the lava rock. Is the lava rock literally changing the path of these characters' fate? Because it's safe to say, if they went to the land registry without it, they wouldn't have gotten into this situation that so easily allowed them to steal Howler's land, literally served up to them on a silver platter. Them getting off on the wrong floor, seeing Sophie, and then her flatlining, causing her father to be distracted, it was all a result of the lava rock. So does this mean that it has a negative side effect, maybe touching on those themes of balance, as what allowed them to get access to this document was the unfortunate death of an innocent woman, which was referred to earlier as absurd. And if absurd is calamity adjacent, we can start to see the forces of balance at play here, as what we know is that the lava rock creates a mechanism for prosperity, miracles that, not unlike Valentine's Gap, can change and warp the world around it to create positive outcomes, or in this case, wealth, which allowed the game to take the land away from Howler, but apparently at the price of this young woman's life. I'm not sure if the game will recognize that these two events are connected, but it could have implications implications for the future of the part, and the more they use the rock for bigger transfers like land, the larger price they will need to pay. And this also gets into the idea of equivalent exchange, which was a huge part of JOJOLands' story. So if this theory is at all true, we kind of have a blending of themes from part 7 and 8 here in part 9, and it's this concept of blessings from the earth that unify the parts. First, it was the Holy Corpse, which created the power of Love Train, our first example of equivalent exchange, then the Blessed Lands of Moria with that same power, and now the Lava Rock. Their powers are all connected to the earth and the balance of energy in some way. So it's interesting to see that using the Lava Rock may not be as foolproof as we initially thought, as it would kind of be a boring story if we just had this magical rock that gives us whatever we want with no downside, but by using it, they could be unintentionally causing absurd events to affect random bystanders, making the game almost villainous in their pursuit for the land, almost like a Valentine or Toru just pushing negative energy onto those around them, albeit unknowingly, if that's actually what's going on here. Because there is a chance the death itself had nothing to do with the lava rock, because I think Bag's Groove was going to attack Sophie whether or not the game brought the rock inside. It just went after anyone who looked at the documents. So it's hard to tell where the power of the lava rock starts and ends. Did she die because Bag's Groove was reactivated, or maybe it was a health complication? That would definitely be the lava rock. So it's not something we can always see, and its power is just kind of a flow that guides people and objects. So what to expect in the future as a result from this? Well, I could really see the game talking to Mr. White, maybe explaining why they did the land transfer, and could start to work together to take down Howler. As after this attack, Mr. White is going to have an extremely personal motivation and might work his way into a supporting cast member. Also, the HOWLER volcano, that is the origin of the lava rock and where Mauk had disappeared and was previously being guarded by police, is now out of Howler's power. So I think it makes sense that the game would return there and to try and find the source of the lava rock, and of course Charmy's brother. I'm sure he'll want to go back as soon as possible. And I feel like going into caves or exploring hollowed out lava tubes is a pretty common tourist activity in Hawaii that I'm sure Araki did during his research, so I wouldn't be surprised if coming up we have an arc that was like a cave expedition or encountering another stand user that's still in the HOWLER volcano trying to protect Howler's secrets. That could be a pretty cool setting and ability, but until then I'm sure we'll have to take at least a few chapters taking care of Bag's Groove and then Bobby Jean if he turns out to be a stand user, and learning about them and what they're all about, so that's what I'd expect in the next chapter. Until then, that's about all I got on chapter 16. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and I'll talk to y'all real soon in a new video. Until then, I'm out. Peace.